I think that at some point in almost every artist's journey, you're going to begin to want to draw real people if you haven't already. Now, I'm a cartoonist. Well, I consider myself a cartoonist. I draw characters in different kinds of styles, but they tend to lean more towards the cartoony, simplistic sort of style. Some might call it anime, though that kind of not triggers me, but it stresses me out. It's not anime, I say, over and over and over again. But the point is that I have gotten to a point where I want to start drawing more real people, whether it's my family or people or celebrities that I like. And I find that one thing I've had a really difficult time with is capturing the likeness of a person. I don't want to draw someone realistically. I want to draw someone in my style, but it just doesn't look like them. It's sort of difficult to transfer iconic, definable features into a cartoony style that doesn't really do well to show those sorts of things off. And look, I have tried looking through tutorials, I've gone through many, to try and sort of, understand what's the process for people who do this, but there's not a lot of advice other than draw a lot of people, which I'm sure is good advice, except I don't really want to spend all of my time just drawing people all the time. I still want to draw characters and do other things. So I'm hoping to try and find sort of a fast-tracking way to draw someone in my style relatively comfortably and have it look like them. So as I try to piece this together with you, I'm going to use the example I'm most inclined to use right now, and that's the Beatles. I've been really obsessed with the Beatles. Yes, this is just a thinly veiled excuse to make a video about drawing the Beatles because that's all I really want to do right now. But also it's for people with pretty iconic and distinct features that also have examples of relatively cartoony styles that have managed to capture their likeness. There are so many examples. So I figured I'd take references of them, take references of art of them, and sort of use that to try and build a framework of how can you transfer the features of a real life person onto your own art style. And have it look like the person you're actually trying to draw and not some freakish amalgamation of a human being. Let's get into it. Let's learn together. Woohoo! Alright, so I decided to start with George Harrison because I think he has some of the more identifiable features. Not that the others aren't identifiable, but these are very easy to draw. I started off by tracing a front-facing view and a side profile just to sort of get an understanding of what exactly we're working with here. So, he's got his sharp jawline and his very thick eyebrows. And I forgot at this stage, but he does also have a kind of like snaggletooth that makes it pretty easy to identify where George is in a drawing. And then I went right into my first sketch, which had all the features that I mentioned, except it looked very wrong. I think that I made his face a little bit too short, so I went through and I elongated it in my second pass, which admittedly also looked pretty weird, but it was starting to head into recognizable territory, I think. And then I went into my third drawing, which definitely, it was better, but there was still something off. And so I decided to try putting my drawing over one of the pictures that I had on the side, one of the many, many pictures I put up as reference. And I tried to readjust the proportions, but it still just looked really weird. But to keep the sizing, I decided to just draw over that sketch for my next version, which is actually my favorite version. I thought that it looked like him, and at first I wasn't necessarily sure if it was just my delusion, so I decided to draw one of the other hairstyles that I had collected because I didn't really use all of the references that I collected. And yeah, it still looked like him. So for now, I decided to put that on pause. I feel like I successfully found a formula for him specifically. And I'll see how much the learning process changes over the other three. And then at the end, I'll probably redraw all four just to try and get a sense of how I improved and what strategies really worked. So yeah, anyways, moving on to Ringo. So for this one, I decided to go with the same method that I did the first time, and I did some tracing. And I don't know what it is about this time versus the first time, but my tracing in this one was much better. I don't know why. I think that I was just sort of getting a bit more comfortable with my own, not my own style, but how to formulate my own style. And actually by the end of this, I kind of preferred the traced versions, but I think that that's just a matter of like looking and referencing, and beside the point. So I was doing some tracing, and then I went for my first go around, which was just like based off that one goofy picture of Ringo that I like. It didn't really look like him, but it sort of looked like him, but not really. So I went through another pass, and then I took a bit longer to do another sketch, but I felt like I just couldn't get his vibe right. It was quite frustrating, and then I realized as I was drawing that he has very hooded eyes. It's not necessarily, well, it's a little bit like Paul's where they're just sort of downturned, but they're very hooded, so I was trying to incorporate that. And also when I'm sketching, I have a hard time drawing light colored eyes without it looking demonic. When I'm actually coloring, it doesn't come across so badly, but in this instance, it was really throwing me off. I threw a little side profile in and was just sort of like trying to do my best to just get some quick sketches out without overthinking it. I did that method where I put my drawing over a photo, but the sizing was different and it kind of screwed me up, so I think I've got to get like a bit of a better method down for that system, because I think it can be really helpful, but I just haven't got it yet. And anyways, by the end of it, I felt pretty comfortable in what I had been able to accomplish. I thought that even when I doodled him, it looked at least a little bit like Ringo, and that was really the goal here. Obviously it's not perfect, but we're here to learn. And now I'm going to move on to the infamous John Lennon. Hi, it's me interrupting this regularly scheduled program to quickly let you know that I have commissions open. I have both some nice polished commissions open that are a little bit more expensive, and some very cheap temporary sketch commissions that I will be doing for $10 to $15 depending on if you want color. There is a form on my website, sseltzerr.com, that you can use to fill out what commission you want. And I also have a Ko-Fi and an Instagram, which you can DM me on to request any sort of commission that you're interested in. You can pay with any credit card, with Venmo, with Bit, or with PayPal. Okay, that's all. Thanks for listening. You know, what's pretty funny is that as I've been going through these, I've been doing the same sort of process, but I noticed that not only have I been getting better, I've been getting a lot faster and more confident. Now, I don't necessarily think that that is the practice specifically, more just like the act of drawing more makes me better. It's like, you know, when you warm up before you draw and then everything you draw afterwards is better. It's that sort of thing. So anyway, I was very happy with this. I decided to do 3 rounds of tracing instead of just the 2, because John Lennon, obviously he has glasses, and I wanted to figure out how I could draw him with the glasses and also without them, without it being too big of a deal. So I went through that, just like tracing, did, you know, the side profile and a smiling. I think that my first sketch in this round was definitely my personal favorite, but I just kept going around trying to get like different angles, and I did like some little doodles. I was just trying to sort of capture his essence, and I don't think that any of them look exactly like him, but I think that I'm starting to get somewhere when it comes to this concept of likeness. I think one of the key things is figuring out how to diverge from same face syndrome without it feeling like a really big step. What I mean by that is that a lot of artists, I think, especially once I get advice from the internet, a lot of the advice is just, you know, use these crazy shapes, do this, do that, and I find that I don't like doing that because it always looks really bizarre in my style when I try to branch out like that. But over the course of drawing the 3 of them, I've realized there are differences in face shape that are really, really subtle that you might not notice if you're sketching or you're just looking really briefly. But as I really sit and think about what I'm drawing, I notice that there really is a difference in all of their noses and face shapes and eyebrow shapes and hair. It's all so significant. So in this case, John Lennon's eyes are significantly smaller than the other 2, and they look squinty because he's squinting when he wears his when he's without his glasses. They're significantly smaller than the other 2, and also not as droopy. They're pretty perky, and when I draw them very rounded. Not rounded, but I should say more like square. Rounded at the top and squinty at the bottom. And surprisingly enough, I thought his nose would be the easiest because it's very straight, but I actually had a harder time because at least with Ringo's, I was able to sort of, you know, I could just draw his nose and it doesn't look too wrong. It just, you know, it looks like it's there, but it's difficult because John Lennon's nose is not small, but it is very, very straight when you look head on. It's not as straight when you look from the side, but it is straight when you look head on. And it's kind of difficult to have that come across without it looking wrong or incorrect. I should say. I think that in the end, some color would do these drawings very good, or some shading. But for now, I do think that I've managed to capture his sort of vibe relatively quickly, or quicker than the other ones. And I'm very proud of myself. So we'll go on to Paul, and then we'll finish this video up. Alright, now here's the thing. Paul McCartney is my favorite Beatle. He's been my favorite Beatle since I became a Beatler, a Beatle fan. So I really cared about getting this one right. More so than the others, I really wanted to get this. And more so than the others, I also really struggle with drawing him. It's been an ongoing struggle. This is what inspired me to make this video in the first place. So obviously, like, you know, I did my little thing. I went through all of the tracing, and then I started sketching. Right off the bat, I noticed it was significantly easier than before. I think I had a better understanding of face structure. I'd just been drawing a lot, so, you know, I kind of got into it. I drew a few alternate hairstyles, and I was just having a good time drawing some expressions. They didn't all look exactly like him, but, you know, I was trying. It looked better than I was used to. And then I decided to work on this, like, more serious sketch in the second page, and for some reason, I was just not getting it right. Something felt, and I realized it was the eyes. It was his eyes. His iconic, droopy, you know, girly eyelashful eyes were really, this is what always screws me up. So I was working on them, and I realized it's not droopy in the same way that Ringo's eyes are kind of hooded. They're still very round. They're like almonds, just kind of slanted. So I was working on them, and I made another sketch, and it just wasn't looking right. So I finally enacted that strategy that I discovered, where I put my drawing over a drawing of him, and I sort of adjusted the eye sizing, and I realized something that has been screwing me up in all of my drawings is the distance between the eyes. The reason I think that this screws me up is because I'm used to drawing very big eyes, and so eye distance doesn't really matter. I just kind of like plop them straight down in the middle of the head and go from there. But I think that in this instance, where I'm drawing them a lot smaller, the distance between them is significantly more important in terms of impression and I don't know, likeness. I spent significantly longer on this one than I did on the other Beatles, and I'm very happy with where I'm at. So I'm going to take a break, and I'll come back tomorrow with just like an overview, a recap, while I work on a summary drawing, I guess I would call it. And I'll just give a sort of brief overview of the exact tips that I learned, what I recommend, and just steps moving forward. So today I didn't do a lot of drawing. I wanted to sort of come into this fresh, not warmed up, just to sort of see like really how much progress did I really make. So I chose like a generic group photo-esque, you know, selfie kind of pose. I realized after the fact that it looks a bit modern, but anyway, you know, not of the times, I mean, but I wanted to also try and use their 64 look, because I think it's the look that people have the hardest time telling them apart, and so I wanted to try and, you know, challenge myself by using that. So I started with John. I had a reference of him that was somewhat in the same angle, and I just sort of went for it. And now I don't necessarily think it looks exactly like him. I did go back and make some changes afterwards, and I just didn't want to overthink it. So I moved on to Paul. It was identifiable as Paul. Does it look like Paul? I don't know, but it definitely is recognizable as him. Anyone who saw it in the context of the drawing would know. And the same goes for George, although I do think that George's does look like him. I'm very proud of myself. I'm very proud of myself for how I drew George in this drawing. I think it looks really good. I included his little fang, and I really wasn't sure what to do about his jawline, because in the cartoon they include that line very visibly, and in a lot of art as well, but I wasn't sure, but I ended up including it very lightly, and it doesn't come off as weird as I thought it did. And then for Ringo, I had a very difficult time. I thought it would be a bit easier because I have some experience drawing Ringo, but it was very difficult. So I did the method where I drew his face, and then I put a transparent image of him in a similar angle over it to try and like see where my proportions were. And when I adjusted the proportions and sort of gave it a bit more time, it ended up looking a lot more like him. And then I went back and I did the same thing with John to sort of readjust his eye shape and the distance between them, as I figured out is where I struggled struggles. So that was what I went through and adjusted. And by the end of it, honestly, I was pretty happy with myself. I think that overall, John does not look a lot like John. I am not exactly sure what I can do about it, but in terms of the context of the four of them, it definitely looks the most like him. Ringo and George are my two favorites, and Paul looks a little bit more cartoony than I usually go for, but the fact is that they are all identifiable as themselves, and the art itself is significantly better than it was before. For general tips and tricks that I'd recommend, if you're on digital, I would definitely do the transparent image over your drawing already, because you want to get used to drawing. At least in my opinion, I've never been a fan of the tracing method because I don't really get the brain work. You get the muscle memory, but I don't really actually remember. And I find that I have a much easier time trying to get it in my style by just sort of trying to relax and just draw the features. I guess draw them based off of each other, like how I figured out that Paul's eyes and Ringo's eyes are sort of drawn differently. Paul's are rounder and Ringo's are more hooded, even though they're both kind of droopy, and things like that. So comparing them to other people and to sort of get a grasp of, okay, well, if I draw round wide eyes like this, then I should draw droopy eyes like this, and stuff like that, to sort of just judge your style based off of itself. The only way to get over same face syndrome is to experiment and making things look different than they did before. I know that that sounds really basic, but it's not the kind of thing that jumps into my head. And obviously the advice that everyone gives is to just draw a lot, draw from reference, draw these things. Like it sucks to say it because it is said and doesn't really give me a lot of hope as an artist myself. But the fact is that sometimes practice really does make perfect. It's just about practicing smart. And I know that a lot of these tips are much more suited for digital art and not as much for traditional art. I will admit I have an easier time drawing from realism when I'm using a pencil because I don't know, maybe it's because I'm more relaxed or I do different shading methods. I just end up being a lot more satisfied with the product when I draw with pencil, and so a lot of these tips were for me for digital, trying to sort of break out of that same face syndrome and use a different mold. Anyway, that's all I have to say on this. I hope that this was helpful for you, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye!